It's a pleasure to have you all gathered up for today for this presentation titled The 5 Steps to Becoming a Data-Driven Organization. I know you have taken time off your precious morning to be here, and I'm sure most have been bombarded with other webinars, and we are hoping that this one is interesting and relevant for you. My name is Minoj Salam, and I head DataQraft as the Director of Business and Strategy. Before we dive into the key session, I would like to take a couple of minutes for a quick introduction to who we are as an organization at DataQraft. So at DataQraft, we are attempting to bring the best-in-class data and advanced analytics platforms and solutions to help organizations derive deeper and faster insights from varied and complex data sources. Now, we've been doing this for the past 5 years with over 100 projects. We are present across 3 countries, 6 cities. We're also part of a larger group known as Square One Technologies. And we have a team of over 50 professionals ranging from data architects, data scientists, big data experts, data engineers, analysts, BI developers, and so on. So what do we do at DataQraft? Today, data is available everywhere, and with the magnitude and richness of data, it has the potential to empower businesses to grow. However, the challenges in creating value out of data is complex and probably daunting. At DataQraft, what we are doing is we are trying to attempt bridging this gap between organizations' data strategy and business strategy so that data drives business decision-making across the entire value chain of an organization. So what we do is we help organizations manage the full data and analytics lifecycle, from data integration, data storage, data migration, data management to business intelligence, and by harnessing the power of machine learning and AI, and eventually bringing in value and insights into the business. And we can't do this with a singular platform or application. Hence, we have partnership with leading platforms in the data and analytics space with Snowflake, MicroStrategy, Alteryx, Qlik, Talkwalker, DataRobo, and Talend, of course. So in today's agenda, we will see what are some of the key aspects of becoming a data-driven organization. The digital economy calls for data and analytics to be infused in every role, businesses, processes, decision, and action. With the right approach, data and analytics can be a leading source of competitive advantage in organizations. To accomplish this, it is important to create a data-driven culture among organizations focusing on delivering business outcomes. Now, this session is going to run for less than an hour. We seem to have over 40 participants from around the region, as far as Tunisia. Before I hand over the session to Brian and Luca, some minor notes on the platform itself. I'm hoping that you can all see my screen and hear me well. I hear a little bit of background noise. I think it's a little bit of echo going on. We'll try to cut that. We have kept all on mute during the session so that we don't have any interruptions. However, we will entertain questions, and you can post them on the Q&A session, which you can find on the left top corner. And we'll address the questions towards the end of the sessions. And lastly, I encourage you to go full screen so that the visuals would have the clarity you require. With that, let me hand over the presentation to Brian Ferens from Talend.
Better. So just as a very, very quick introduction. So first and foremost, this is not a product presentation. We really are not here today to talk about Talend products and technologies. But the objective really is to try and give you a view and an insight into what effectively is driving digital strategies throughout the region and what it takes for organizations to become data-driven. So there's two presenters. I'm doing the main presentation. My name's Brian. I've been working for Talend for 4 years, and along with Luca, we cover Middle East Africa. So Middle East Africa is our focus. And Talend is lucky to have customers in pretty much all of the countries within GCC and beyond. So we're very familiar with the region, and the key thing is that it's very, very exciting times. So things are changing, and I guess I can't do any presentation these days without talking about pandemics, but obviously things are changing more rapidly. And the key thing is that this year has probably been more unprecedented in terms of the drive towards digitalization. And what we're seeing more and more, and it's not just within Middle East Africa, it's globally. But for organizations to survive, for organizations to continue, data is an absolute essential commodity that fuels that business. Now, there's nothing new about that. Data's been around for a long time. But more and more now, the need to create value from data is not a nice to have, it's becoming a must have. And as I mentioned before, things used to be quite stable. If we look at the industry for data and data management, its background with a lot of IT comes from sort of mainframe. And when we look at ETL type technologies, when we look at how organizations typically look at business intelligence and data warehousing, this technique, this sort of ETL type methodology is probably somewhere in the region of 50 years old. And it's changing rapidly now. And the thing that's really driving the change more than anything is the fact that the world is now digital. So what we're seeing is that what used to be a very stable environment, and when organizations were looking at data, typically they were looking at their own data, they were looking at static data, probably more importantly, they were looking at data that is aged, data that is historic. To survive in the market today, data has to be real-time, data has to be near real-time, and the business criticality of data is shifting faster and faster away from business critical, where the use of data primarily is to create dashboards and KPIs, etc. That has now shifted from business critical to mission critical, where data is being used real time and near real time to either make business decisions or to assist business decisions that effectively are driving the day-to-day activities of the organization. So we've seen a shift away from business critical to mission critical, and more now data is moving to life critical. And we're not just talking about robotics in terms of surgery, in terms of remote diagnostics, but when we look at how data is being used in our day-to-day lives to manage things like traffic flows, urban planning, etc., the consequences of getting data wrong or making the wrong decisions can be catastrophic. And this could be something as trivial as a road accident. It could be something that's managing drone highways in the sky, where the consequences of getting data wrong while making the wrong decision have massive impact. So it's interesting that when we look at the maturity in Middle East Africa, what we see effectively is a situation where the maturity of the organization is normally gauged by the appointment of a chief data officer, or in certain cases, a chief digital officer. So it's interesting now that when we look at ownership of data and how data is being used, today, most of the use cases we see, and it's not just unique to Middle East Africa, it's happening in other parts of the world. But the level of data maturity of most organizations is still at a relatively low level. And the indicator for that, from a Talend perspective, is the fact that they're looking in terms of priorities still at data integration, where the objective and the task of IT is to be able to identify and to be able to access as many data sources internally as they can. And that, to a lot of organizations, is still quite challenging. But data integration is one thing. And once you can assess and you can start to access that data, then data quality becomes the next requirement. So very quickly on the back of data integration is data quality, and that requirement will shift very quickly to master data, where the objective of the organization is to create single versions of the truth, golden records, where they're looking to deduplicate data, and more importantly, where the business starts to take ownership of the data, and we see the appointment of data stewards at the business level to take that responsibility from an IT perspective. Now, one of the limiting factors for digitalization has really been around the availability of the right technology. And one of the common limitations in Middle East is the fact that, particularly at government level, most government organizations are very siloed, and most government organizations are still running on four walls data centers, and in many, many cases, they are operating completely independently of each other. Now, when you look at traditional ETL type methodologies, that's fine, because you're going to utilize your server, your storage, your RAM, etc., and you'll probably run your data management jobs out of hours. As you move to mission critical, then the compute power that you require and the decision making that you're going to take based on the data shifts very, very quickly away from traditional BI and data warehousing towards the concepts of data lakes, etc. Now, data lakes are not new. Data lakes have been around for a while. But the main difference between data warehousing and data lakes is that data warehousing effectively is a process that is being driven by the extract, transform, and load type concepts, where you're extracting data from various sources, you're transforming it, and you're pushing that data to a target. When we look at data lakes, the concept is the other way around. Instead of being ETL, it's ELT, where you're extracting large volumes of data, you're loading that data into a data lake, and effectively you're then transforming it either at an application level or at a data visualization level, etc. So architecture suddenly becomes the big key thing. And the problem with architectures is that the access that you need to modern, scalable, highly performant architectures have really been limited by the access to the right technology. Now, in the Middle East again, there's a lag, and it's not just in Middle East, we see it in other regions, but the world lags behind the US in terms of technology innovation and technology adoption. So what we're seeing now is that from an architectural perspective, for organizations to become data-driven, for organizations to drive digital strategies, it's a prerequisite that they have to have access to the right technology. Now, because of data sovereignty rules, because of, in certain cases, a lack of reliability of internet connections and fiber connections within the region, cloud has not been accepted. But what we're seeing now as the big and primarily the two key players, which effectively are AWS and Azure, with a little bit of Alibaba, what we're seeing now is the investment of those organizations to create either data centers or POPs in country that will help overcome the data sovereignty rules, but also provide access to more agile and more effective data management platforms when you start to build and you start to utilize technologies such as data lakes, etc., etc. So from an infrastructure perspective, things are changing and things are changing rapidly. We're seeing an issue at the moment with oversubscribing, that there's more demand for cloud than there is capability. And what that's doing, it's making the pricing high, which is an obstacle to a lot of organizations at the moment. But it's interesting that when we look at what's happening again, primarily in the US and parts of Europe and APAC, is that because of this dependency, because computing is becoming more and more of a utility, and where the utility providers, primarily AWS and Azure, are providing services, what is starting to happen is that we're getting to this point of vendor lock-in, where the services and the functionality that AWS and Azure are providing is more than just infrastructure as a service and platform as a service, that they're actually starting to use their position to deliver applications, to deliver services, in some cases financial services. AWS is part of Amazon, which is fast becoming one of the biggest global retailers. So the concept of multi-cloud is starting to get a lot of traction. So our prediction, as the maturity and understanding of cloud in the Middle East increases, then organizations will start to realize that it's not a choice between AWS and Azure, but really strategically and having a cloud strategy, you've got to be able to look at multi-cloud. So when we look at the architectures, when we talk about data and the usage of data, then very, very quickly, as data becomes more of a commodity and data is more abundant in an organization and data is more readily consumed within an organization, then the requirement for data governance suddenly increases. Now, one of the biggest drivers of data governance recently has been the European-driven GDPR, which is a law that protects personal data. And it has different forms in different parts of the world, but I think it's fast become a requirement for organizations globally. But to comply with something like GDPR, you do have to have data governance. And from a compliance perspective, if you're an organization that's working in healthcare, you're going to need HIPAA compliance. If you're a bank or a financial services company, you'll probably need PCI DSS, or one of the many other regulations that come about. But data governance then becomes an essential part of it. And the role of IT within data governance is not just to ensure that IT delivers the right platform and the right technology to be able to process the data and to deliver that data in the right structure, in the right time, in the right place. But the role of IT is to provide the business users the tools and the access to the data so that the business users can become autonomous consumers of data. And that data more and more is becoming much more complex. So when we look at the value of data to an organization, data is something that you create as an organization. And as data shifts more and more to be external to the organization, then the role of IT suddenly becomes more critical in having a platform that can access external data sources, that can consume external data sources, but also has the ability to be able to track the lineage of that data. Because as you're applying more data intelligence from the data that you have, as you're mining that data, as you're starting to process that data, then as business decisions and as governance suddenly become requirements, then having the ability to be able to trace the lineage of that data becomes almost as valuable as the data itself. So when we look at the technologies and the methodologies that organizations are adopting, because data is not new, But the way that organizations process that data and the structure of that data and the type of that data suddenly is very, very different to what it was 5 or 10 years ago. So when we look at some of the concepts around collecting data and who can consume that data internally, who can model that data, the intelligence around data management and how data scientists work and can apply the various tools and technologies that they need. This is something that's increasing at a business level, and the industry is moving more and more towards a self-service model from a data consumer perspective. So it's interesting that the role of IT is primarily to ensure that the different types and structures of data, whether that's web services, whether it's getting data from applications, whether it's getting data from IoT devices or video streams, etc., more and more now, the strategy and the success of an organization is to be able to get as many different data types and structures from as many different data sources as possible, and to allow that information to be shared internally with their consumers, which are their internal customers, so that they in turn can design and consume the data that will enable them to, as I say, make business decisions. And in certain cases, when we're looking at the velocity of that data, because certainly straight away, when you're looking at unstructured data and when you're looking at data that's being consumed from external sources, that's becoming real time or near real time, now you have to apply machine learning stroke artificial intelligence to be able to extract the business value from that data that is flowing into the organization, be it in a data lake or data warehouse, or in certain cases in terms of a live data stream. But it's interesting when you look at Talend from a data management perspective, we just look at data as a 1 and 0. So from this webinar, I think one of the key takeaways is that you have to consider data in its rawest form. So when you look at data as purely 1s and 0s, which it is, with a modern data management platform, you can consume data, whether it's audio, video, flat files, structured files, IoT, sensors, etc. So it's very, very interesting that the complexity and the size of the scope of data within organizations has suddenly increased exponentially. But to be able to process that data requires a completely different architecture, and it certainly requires access to scalable architectures where effectively, according to the amount of data that you're consuming and processing, that's going to scale up and down on a sort of daily, hourly, or minute-by-minute basis. And you can't do that within the constraints of a four-walls data center. So what you have to be able to do is to be able to scale up and scale down. So if we go back to today's challenges, I mean, I've been talking a little bit about the future, but the important thing for an organization, when it has a digital strategy or when it becomes data-driven, the vision of the organization has to be beyond structured data, and it has to be looking more at real-time data as opposed to sort of batch processing. But the interesting thing is that when we look at the challenges still today within most organizations, the challenges around implementing a data management platform are still really around the basics and getting the basics right. So when we talk to government organizations, when we talk to quasi-government organizations, if I'm talking about Ministry of Interior, Ministry of Finance, I might be talking about the Road Transport Authority, I might be talking to telco operators. Still today, a lot of them are struggling because they do not fulfill the basic requirements of data integration and data quality. And it's interesting that if you look at the success of many, many organizations when it comes down to implementing a data management platform and being able to internally assign the responsibility of data quality. This is something that isn't always easy to achieve. So what we have now is a situation where the challenge for your customers or the challenge for you as an organization potentially is quite massive, because the demand on the usage of data is increasing. The demand to be able to process that data more effectively and more quickly is increasing. And the danger is that if the requirements of the business are not satisfied, one of the outcomes is that with the availability of cloud providers, it's relatively easy for business units to actually bypass IT and to go to somebody like AWS and Azure and to build, very complex, highly available multi-node cluster configurations that, without being a Hyper-V or vSphere or vCenter expert, you can build the data lakes, you can build the data management platforms without the requirement of IT. And this becomes, or it is known as shadow IT, which is becoming quite a challenge for IT organizations, because from a governance perspective, from a security perspective, the last thing an organization wants is that IT and all of the risks that go with building and maintaining IT and moving data within the organization and outside of the organization is being managed by non-IT people. So what we see now is the requirement for IT, as I say, to be able to provide the infrastructure, to provide the tools, and to provide the flexibility of the platform to enable businesses and the business users to consume that data to drive their business decision making and to make sure that the value from data is maximized. So once you've achieved that, then, as I mentioned before, data management and data quality suddenly become key. So the requirements for IT really, again, is to provide the components and to provide the structure and the knowledge for organizations to be able to look at not just information management, but to look at data management. So there are two key requirements here. There's a requirement in terms of the data management for data quality, master data, etc., all of the things that I've mentioned before. But when we look at how data is consumed internally by the business users, then obviously we're looking now at different levels of information management, which can vary from content management, content delivery. It can be looking at data as asset management. And there's many platforms and there's many tools available for organizations to be able to manage that internally at the level that they want to be able to manage, but with the flexibility of being able to do this within a framework that includes a very solid and a very structured level of platform and internal discipline and best practices, because you can't have information management without data management, and you can't have data management without information management. The two things are very complementary. But the role of IT, as I say, is really to help bridge that gap. So when we talk about data management systems, and Talend primarily is a data management platform, then, as I've mentioned before, when we look at the process of being able to acquire, validate, store, protect, etc., data from various sources, which can be mobile devices, in this case, TV, point of sale, etc., where that data is effectively collected, And more now, as I say, it's interesting that that data is going to reside external to the organization. And we're seeing a big increase in data brokerage now. As organizations manage to create value from data, they can actually monetize that data, and they can sell or they can share that data with other organizations, and in certain cases with their competitors. But certainly, if you are a retail organization and you're collecting data based on consumer information, that information is of value to the manufacturers and the suppliers of the products that you sell. That information is valuable to the people that consume the products and services. So it's very interesting now that when you look at organizations and how the value of data can suddenly turn into something like a business unit, where instead of it being a cost, it becomes a revenue stream. And more organizations are creating business units purely based on the value of the data that they are creating. This can be very lucrative for a lot of organizations. So the interesting thing is that you can open the doors, and this is an objective of IT in many cases, to be able to give the business and their internal customers access to as much data as they want. And one of the things that is not in short supply is data. But obviously, when you're making business decisions are normally better when there's a richer data set. So if you've got more information and you've got information that comes from multiple sources, then the ability to be able to make more informed decisions and more real-time decisions suddenly depends on the variety and the velocity of the data that's out there. So within a data management platform, what you should be looking for is a product that effectively will integrate any data source. So regardless of the structure and the type of that data, regardless of whether that data is internal, in a database, in applications, or whether that data is external in the form of video streams, in the form of social media chats, etc., what you need to be able to do is to be in a position where, regardless of where that data is coming from, that data is integrated and that data is then brought into the organization, and that data is either structured or transformed internally and delivered to the internal business users, or that data is stored in its raw format for processing from an internal customer or application perspective. So what we're seeing now is a requirement that real time becomes more and more important. As I mentioned before, organizations are moving from business to mission critical to life critical. But the interesting thing is that managing data is important because the disciplines that you need in the organization and the vision that you need suddenly increases significantly. And one of the limitations from an IT perspective is that when we talk about the investment that's required to acquire this technology, this is normally something that's outside of the budget of IT. Most IT budgets are based on their OPEX, the cost of keeping the lights on, the cost of maintaining their systems and processes. But what we're seeing now is that the investment for digitalization, the investment for being a data-driven company, isn't an investment from IT, it's actually an investment from the organization itself. So when we start looking at the requirements in terms of the investments that need to be made, one of the key components is a digital data management platform. Because without a digital data management platform, you won't have the core component that effectively is the engine that will drive all of the transactions, that will integrate all of the different data sources through all of the different applications, whether that's through APIs or web services, etc., etc. But you have to be in a position where strategically, instead of buying a tool that provides a technical connection or a tool that provides a technical function, you start to invest strategically in a data management platform, because that data management platform will give you everything that you need to drive digital transformation and become a data-driven organization. And it will open the doors for organizations, because one of the things that IT wants to be able to do is to be an enabler and not an inhibitor. And if IT can't provide the connections and provide the data for the internal business consumers, then it's not an enabler, it becomes an inhibitor. But once IT has achieved the goal and the aim of data integration, then this is really where the partnership between IT and the consumer becomes important. So there's always a saying that data is a team sport. And when it comes to data quality and data quality management, this is the key area where the responsibility of data quality primarily sits with the business users. So when we look at data, one of the key things with data we can always guarantee is that data changes with time. So even if you look at personal data, your telephone number will change, your email address will change, the company you work for will change. So it's very difficult, and we see a lot of projects, particularly in the Middle East, where the goal is to try and drive a data cleansing project. That almost becomes counterproductive, because the minute you clean data, then that data then goes out of date. And the key thing with data is that when you apply data quality, you need to apply data quality at two levels. You apply data quality to data that's static, and that can be data that sits in your data warehouse, it can be within a data hub, it can be in a data mart, it can be anywhere that you want to store that data. But the key thing is that even if you apply data quality rules to data that is static, one of the things that always happens to data is that it moves. And today, the modern concepts and the modern technology is to apply data quality rules, not just to static data, whether it's master data or reference data or whatever data type or format it is. But when that data is moving, and when you start to integrate that data with other data types, or you're structuring that data into certain formats, then the ability and the requirement to apply data quality real time or near real time, when that data is being moved either inside the organization or outside the organization, becomes critical. So it's very important that when you look at data quality, you consider that data quality has to be applied at rest and in motion, because without that, the outcome of the decision making that you'll make based on that data will not be as good as it should be. And that's one of the key considerations now. The difference between getting data quality right and wrong is not in the key performance indicator or a dashboard or some sort of extrapolation that will forecast supply and demand. But now if that data is wrong, it will impact on something that's much more critical to the organization, because effectively it's being used for decision making. So as I mentioned before, when we look at data and data management, it's important that you consider data management not as a tool, and most organizations have acquired many tools over the years, but the problem when you acquire tools is that you acquire all of the overhead to be able to manage those tools. So if you have a data integration tool, one of the key things is that you need to make sure that that tool is compatible, it's updated, in line with all of the applications and connections that you're going to use that tool for. And the problem is that that's creating much more of an overhead from an IT perspective. Now, when we look at the way the industry is moving, as data moves from business critical to mission critical, uptime and availability suddenly become key. If your data consumption is business critical, if the job doesn't run in the evening, the worst thing that can happen is that a report is delayed. But when that data is being used for mission critical, it might be that the organization stops working. It can't process visa requests. It can't take customer orders. And that means that the data and the platform, being mission critical, need to be as available as possible. So now we're moving away from 99.98 or 99.9 availability to 5 nines availability. But to achieve that, you've got to look at the concept of continuous integration and continuous deployment. So what we're seeing now is a shift as the data management platform becomes critical and business critical. Then the requirement for maintaining as much uptime as possible and minimizing either planned outage or unplanned outage requires the platform to be up and available all of the time. So when you look at cloud and when we look at SaaS, the whole data management platform can now be provided as a software as a service, where instead of IT having to maintain the platform, the platform is available 24/7 on a 5 nines availability. And IT doesn't have the overhead of having to create test and dev environments to be able to look at change management and change control. You can use the data management platform with the assurance that it's going to be the latest version and it will always be compatible with all of the technology changes that are going on around. So when we look at the cloud and the cloud adoption, going back to the Middle East, I mean, particularly now we see more and more private clouds being driven within government organizations, although some government organizations are using public cloud. But when we look at the requirement for technology, it's very, very difficult to pursue something further than data integration and data quality without having to use more agile and more scalable IT infrastructures. And the only way that most organizations can do that is to use cloud. But remember, no two cloud providers are the same. So a year or two ago, the decision was, well, do we go AWS or Azure or Alibaba or Oracle Cloud or Huawei or whatever the cloud provider is? This is changing now. And when you look at data management as a modern platform has to be able to provide independence in terms of who that cloud provider is. So it's important that when you look at a data management platform, it not just works with AWS or Azure or Google or Alibaba, et cetera, but that same platform can work in a hybrid environment and it can work on premise. So the important thing here is that there are limitations on cloud providers. And the strategy of AWS and Azure is quite different. If I look at the investment in the Middle East, we see Microsoft invested in four walls data centers. We've seen AWS acquire the infrastructure in Bahrain, where this is being managed as primarily a private cloud with some public cloud type functionality. But more and more now, we see AWS investing in what we call edge cloud, where effectively the processing of the data is done locally. And there isn't the need to do the long haul to move data into a centralized cloud, be it in Asia Pacific, Europe, or North America. So we are seeing a level of maturity increasing. We're seeing more and more of a demand from users to be able to use modern cloud environments and infrastructures. So, it was mentioned earlier about Snowflake. We can look at Databricks. We can look at the concept towards serverless computing. So you have to remember that technology is moving very, very quickly. And the important thing is that the ownership and the creativity of the technology that we're all adopting is not owned by IBM or by Dell or by Oracle. Most of the innovation is coming still from open source, and a lot of it still comes from West Coast US. And this is really where we're seeing the ability for organizations to become more competitive and to survive in not just this situation we have with the pandemic, but with the global recession that we're all suffering as a consequence. It's important that organizations become much more agile, and it's important that organizations can not just access more data, but they can process that more data. So with data in mind, this idea of looking at structured data and unstructured data is something that I think a lot of people are still trying to understand the potential of. So when we talk about structured data is something that effectively is what most people are working on today. And I think most people that have data management experience understand the concepts and the value of structured data. But structured data isn't the only type of data. So obviously we have unstructured, we have semi-structured data. And it really is the unstructured data that provides the most value to an organization, because this is where the richest source of data is coming from. And when we talk about unstructured data, we can talk about files, we can talk about documents, spreadsheets, we can talk about video, we can even talk about audio as being an unstructured data. So the important thing is that when you look at data management and when you design data management platforms, you have to be designing for future states. And certainly, as I mentioned before, when you're making mission critical decisions, when you're making life critical decisions based on data that's available to you, having the ability to effectively have the analytical tools and the algorithms and machine learning, et cetera, for processing, analyzing, and creating value from that data suddenly becomes critical to every single organization. So what we're seeing at the moment is a balance between organizations that today are trying to manage data integration and data quality, because effectively this is what their priorities are. And from an IT perspective, this is what the business is demanding. But the challenge is that in parallel, what IT has to do is to be able to build new competencies and new skills based on a completely different architecture and based on a completely different dimension of data that is shifting away from the traditional processing of data within their IT resources to be able to process data that is unstructured and to be able to deliver, in a lot of cases, raw data to internal users so that they then can extract and consume and create the value from that data itself. So there's a big shift now in terms of where organizations are today and where they need to be. And one of the key indicators from my perspective, and I think from Luca's perspective, is that when we talk with organizations that talk about data strategies, normally, the indicator is that if they've appointed a chief digital officer, then we know that they've got somebody that normally doesn't report to IT. They normally report to the CEO, but somebody that is looking at data, not from a limitation perspective to say, well, we haven't got the servers and the storage and the networks and the infrastructure, but someone that says, look, this is data. I don't care about IT. IT is now a utility. You know, I consume electricity, but I don't have to own my own generator or wind farm to do it. So what's happening now, when we look at the digital transformation, and this is really a key indicator, when organizations have a digital transformation strategy, then this is a key message to us that tells us that they are aware of the significance and the scope and the opportunity that data has to the organization. But digital transformation is around the strategy. It's around creating, not being scared of data. Data is something that they want to consume more of because they can create more value. And in creating value, they can look at more customer-centric views when you look at customer 360, et cetera, et cetera. But also when you are driving digital transformation, then typically the ability to be able to apply effective data governance becomes easier. And when you look at the operational model, as the organization is looking to bring new products and services to market, not in months and years, but almost within days and weeks, then you have to look at different ways of working more agile. You have to be in a position where you have innovation and you learn more by mistakes than success. So having the ability to have an access to a modern data management platform and the ability to be able to try new technologies and new ideas is something that becomes a critical success factor to any digital transformation. And the other key thing that goes with it is that you need an organizational structure to be able to drive not just the strategy, but to work with IT and look at the availability and use of that data and to make sure that the technology is actually provided. And again, it goes back to what I said. At the moment, most IT organizations are probably scared to talk about digital transformation, because it creates challenges for themselves, because they need to look at the world in a different way. They need to look at acquiring new skills. But the other key thing is that normally they don't have the budgets to acquire the technology. But if IT is working with the business and the proof of value from an organization perspective is there, then the business will find the funding. This always happens. If there's a business case to make an investment, organizations will make investments. But at the moment, there are too many IT shops globally that still don't have a level of maturity, that they're working with the business and they're understanding business values rather than talking about technologies and feeds and speeds, etc. So I'm just going to pause there and I'll try and sort of summarize. And as I say, we're not here to sort of talk about Talend products and platforms, but I think before we get on to it, the world is changing. The world is changing faster in the last 6 months than it's ever done. The challenges for everybody are out there. People have to reinvent themselves. We have to be in a position where digitalization becomes the norm. Companies have to change their structures. They have to be able to acquire new technologies. And there are more and more opportunities to be able to do that. And certainly when we look in the Middle East and the availability of cloud, putting security to one side for the moment, but more and more now, it is possible to acquire the technology that's needed. But effectively, what you have to be able to do is to have a joint strategy between the business and IT to be able to justify the investments and to justify the products that are required. So when we go back to Talend, Talend is very, very simple. Talend's not an old company. It's a 12-year-old company. It's based in San Francisco, which is really where most of the technology innovation comes from. But the good thing is Talend is primarily two products. It's a product called Data Fabric, which is the data management platform. and we have primarily a sister product, which is Data Catalog, that effectively is collecting the metadata, which is data about the data. So as I mentioned before, when you're looking at data governance, etc., then data lineage becomes a requirement. But as companies become much more mature around data and data management, then metadata suddenly becomes the key requirement. So having data lineage and being able to know the sources of data real time, to know that when business decisions are being made, you know exactly what data was being used, where and when to make that decision, almost becomes as valuable as the data itself. And the other product we have, which was an acquisition, Stitch, is effectively a lift and shift type product where as organizations migrate from on-prem to the cloud, quite often they have high volumes of data to move to the cloud, whether it's to Snowflake or another cloud platform. Stitch enables them to do that. But in the Middle East, we don't see a lot of cloud migrations. Most companies that we work with tend to look at cloud for new projects. It's difficult, if not impossible, to migrate mainframe applications to the cloud. It's never going to work. But ultimately, when we look at new projects and new use cases, then what you can do, you can, in parallel, start to build new architectures and new competencies based on a digital transformation, or if you become a data-driven organization, you can balance the two things in parallel. So the Talend product, I mean, we're not going to go through the product today, but in simple terms, it will enable you to start this digital transformation journey. And although primarily it's only two products, the key thing with Talend is that you don't have to take all of the product. So today, if you wanted data integration as being the key requirement, you can acquire the Talend product data integration features, but we will still provide the complete data fabric product. So if in the future you wanted to introduce data quality, then the upgrade path to data quality is simply just changing the software subscription. And Talend is based on an annual developer subscription. So within Talend, there's no data tax. We don't charge for data usage or data throughput. We purely charge for the developers that build the jobs that will execute in your environment. And as I mentioned, because we will ship the complete platform, the upgrade path, you don't need add-ons and plugins. You just change the developer subscription, and the extra features and functionality will be available in the developer GUI. And you can do that right the way throughout the platform for data preparation, data stewardship, API, etc., etc. And Data Catalog is the main metadata management tool that provides data about the data. So I think now we're just going to throw the session open, and Luca, who's the technical lead for Talend in Middle East Africa, is available if there's any technical questions. So I think we're ready to take questions now.
Yep, thanks a lot, Brian. Like I said before, if you have any questions, you have a little button on the left, just on the left-hand side, top of your screen. You can post in your questions there. I think a couple of people have asked for the presentation itself. Yes, we'll be sharing the presentation. Yeah, Brian, there's one question here, Brian and Luca. how do I integrate the data management platform to my data warehouse? And is that is that easy? And can I get immediate benefits out of it?
All right. Hi, guys. This is Luca. I can answer. So for integrating the data warehouse is very easy because actually we have more than 1,000 between connectors and components present in the platform. So basically, you have out-of-the-box components that will allow you to read and write to different targets. And these targets can be data warehouses, can be also flat files, and so on and so forth. So there are already out-of-the-box components that allow you to interact directly with let's say the most of the data warehouses that are in the market. So let me see here if I read the other questions. Every distance that I always lead to the data warehouse setup. No, actually, so for example, if you want to interact with Snowflake, and I'm mentioning Snowflake because actually we noticed that it's becoming more and more popular. Actually, you have input components that allow you to read data from Snowflake and output components for writing data to Snowflake. So it's really it's something very trivial to interact with. So we have different data owners in each country. What is the best way to have this data in one place and make some sense and added value of it? So actually, when let's say that thank you for this question. Actually, this requirement can be approached in different ways. So first of all, on the technical side, you have within the platform all the elements that allow you to integrate different sources, normalize the data, cleansing it, applying also algorithms, so machine learning algorithms. You can use big data technologies and so on and so forth. So let's say that technically you have all the instruments for extracting the information and even creating additional information over your existing data. On the other hand, when it comes to to answer to the question, how can I discover what I can do then technically for extracting and enhancing the information that I want for your data, then at this point, a metadata management tool like the data catalog that Brian defined, our sister product, can help you there. Because actually you have a system that can harvest metadata from your different sources and targets, business intelligence tools, giving you the holistic view of your entire infrastructure. And that allows the different owners, so the different data owners, to have an holistic view and a shared view, unified, of the infrastructure, of the data, of the metadata, also of the definitions of all the terminologies that circle around the data, in order to have a collaborative tool that allows them to exchange information between them, that will then allow them to ease the discover of the actions that they can take for extracting more and more information over the data. I hope I answered to your questions here.
Yes, I think we may have, you're running a little over time, but if we can just take a couple of more questions, that'd be great.
Yeah.
The question is, how do you ensure data quality for unstructured data? That's always a challenge.
Yeah, no, that is true. But usually, there are first of all, when we are talking about data quality, you know that it's like when we are talking about data governance. It's quite a broad concept. So when it comes to unstructured data, And when we are talking about data quality around the unstructured data, so let's say that at very high level, you can ensure the data quality of, for example, defining a specific format that you want to have for a specific field. So basically, when it comes to unstructured data, what can happen is that you need for example, every, let's say, instance of your data, you need to define where you can extract a specific information. And then starting from after the extraction of this specific information, you can work on that. So if, for example, coming from an unstructured data that can be a message coming from a machine, for example, from a device that has that can have a different format, or for example, from an image after the application of some specific algorithms, you extract some information. For example, from an image, you extract some specific fields. Actually, you can work with the tool on increasing the quality of some specific little portions of your information. And this is something. Then what you can do is using, for example, passing from the unstructured information that you have to a structured representation, and then working on the quality of this structured representation. That can be at lower levels, as I was saying, formats, so can be, let's say, technical data quality rules. But then you can also, at this point, apply business, so higher level data quality rules. So basically, it's just when it comes to data quality of unstructured data, is most of the times creating different layers of data quality. So different layers where you analyze when you analyze the portion of data that you are interested to, so the portion of information that you're interested to, applying different levels of data quality rules. I know that it's a difficult question that we could organize probably an entire webinar only on that. I hope that I gave a very high level answer to that.
Great. Yeah, thanks a lot, Luca. I think we have many questions coming up, but I think we have overrun on time. Again, I would like to thank each and every one of you who have taken the time off to come and attend this session. The presentation was probably at a strategic and at a high level, and I'm sure it must have resonated with some of you senior decision makers out there. However, if you would like to get a little more deeper into the subject, into the Talend Data Fabric platform and so on, we are always there. You can reach out to us. And I would like to thank Brian and Luca also for putting up the show together today. I'm hoping that you saw value in the session. We will be having more of such events coming up in the future. We'll keep you notified. Again, I would like to summarize and close the session. Brian, if you have any final words, you could go ahead. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and close the session.
No, I think, just to repeat what you were saying, the key thing here, this was at a very, very high level, but I think it's important that people sort of understand the big picture and the opportunities here. But it's a journey, but as you make the journey, you have to have, an end state in mind. You need to know what you're working towards. But once you've done that, even at a high level, the key thing then is to drill down and to start to understand what that means in terms of where you are today and where you need to be. And then you can start to map the steps. But typically the way that we operate within Talend is that normally we talk with organizations around use cases. And normally at a use case, we probably do a demonstration And the other important thing with Talend is that if you want to be able to evaluate the product, because it's very, very lightweight, although it's a very powerful tool, it's very, very easy to be able to acquire the technology. And because it's intuitive, and I never mentioned, but Talend is a code generator, you can actually start to learn the potential of a digital management platform very, very quickly just from a few use cases. So we're more than happy to assist if anyone does have a requirement to run a small POC or that they just want a demonstration.
Right. Right. Thanks a lot, Brian. Thanks, Lucas, and thanks to each and every one of you who have joined in today. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.